Good morning, everyone, and good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for attending this webinar of Computational Social Science Laboratory. My name is Ling Chu. You can call me Angel, and I am the co-director of the Computational Social Science Lab here at SUHK, and I will be the moderator today of today's talk delivered by Professor Hannah Waight. Today, we are very happy to have Professor Hannah Waight, a sociologist from the University of Oregon Department of Sociology. And Professor Waight received her PhD in sociology from Princeton University and was previously a postdoctoral researcher at the Center of Social Media and Politics at New York University. Her research area, which is not that typical among sociologists, but very interesting to me personally, are about the politics of media and information and their applications for social organizations with empirical context, not only in the United States, but also in authoritarian regimes such as China, Russia, and so on and so forth. Last year, in 2025, which is Hannah's year, she published three influential works all at once. One in PNAS, if you don't know, the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences in the United States, one in American Journal of Sociology, and one in Sociological Methods and Research, all of which are top-tier journals, and all topics are super interesting, at least to me. So, for example, her paper in AJS describes the polarization of inequality perceptions in the new Gilded Age, and her paper in PNAS shows the decade-long growth of government-authored news media in China under Xi Jinping's leadership. I personally am also very interested in not only the three really great publications, but also in her dissertation topic, which examines the mechanisms through which the disunified media control can work in contemporary China. And today, Hannah's talk will center more on, because this is the webinar for Computational Social Science Laboratory, so she prepared her talk centering more on her methodological insights from her research, based on, I think, her publication appearing on the Sociological Methods and Research about quantifying the narrative similarities across languages. So this research, moving beyond the conventional techniques such as topic modeling, this research leverages LLM large language models to identify and compare the underlying claims, interestingly, across texts and across languages, which allows for a more precise understanding about how narratives spread and even expressed in different languages or phrased in distinct ways. So without further ado, I will now turn the table to Professor Waight. Let's welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for that really generous introduction. And did you say your name? I missed it. It's Angel. I can call you by. So I want to make sure I didn't. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Angel, for that, and for inviting me, and for Professor Liang for inviting me, and for Lydia for organizing everything to allow me to have a chance to share these results with you all. So I'm gonna just share my screen. Just a moment. Okay. Great. So this paper is called Quantifying Narrative Similarity Across Languages. It has a lot of wonderful co-authors. So my co-first author, equal co-author, Saul Messing, and then our collaborators, Anton Chirikov, who's at Kansas, Molly Roberts at UCSD, Jonathan Nagler at NYU, Jason Greenfield, he's now a PhD student in computer science at Princeton. Megan Brown, who's now a PhD student in information science at Michigan. Kevin Aslett, who is now at Meta, and Joshua Tucker, who is at NYU. And this paper, as Angel mentioned, was published this past year as part of a special issue in Sociological Methods and Research. And for folks who are interested in AI and generative AI and how sociologists and social scientists can use it in research, I would encourage folks to look at all articles from the special issue. There was a lot of really intriguing ideas about using generative AI for data annotation. There was one article I really liked about how survey respondents may be using generative AI, and so there was a lot of very interesting stuff in this special issue. So I would encourage everyone to take a look, not just at our article, but also the other articles that were there. So the motivation for this project, it actually started really from the other paper that Angel mentioned. And I know Professor Liang said that the students replicated that paper for their replication project, the PNAS paper, and I'm very happy to hear that because its replication is wonderful. Um, and this project actually kind of started out of that project. So that other project was looking at how state media coordination happens in China. And a lot of it happens through requiring newspapers to reprint approved scripts from Xinhua and other official agencies. And so for that other paper, we developed a way to kind of measure these instances where newspapers are reprinting scripts from Xinhua. And a comment that we always got from that when we presented that other paper was, how do you know this isn't just syndication? So the way that we measured um, whether newspapers are kind of picking up on these scripts in Chinese state-controlled news was we looked for bursts of newspapers all printing exactly the same story around the same day. So we relied on text reuse methods, basically. And again, the comment we often got was, well, how you're using text reuse to kind of measure instances where newspapers are reprinting texts because they've been directed to by the state, but how do you know that they're not reprinting these same texts because they independently decided to syndicate the same content? So it's not state driven; it's a sort of independent decision making. So when we were finishing up that other paper, we responded to this common complaint by collecting a set of articles on from U.S. newspapers, and to see, okay, well, let's see, if we applied our same estimator to this case where we don't think that this sort of top down coordination is happening, do we get the same results, which would kind of invalidate our approach? And that is not what we found. What we found when we did this is that news journalists often do reuse content from each other. That's very common, but it's much more common that they're kind of borrowing ideas rather than that they're borrowing exact text. So, just to give an example of what this looks like, here is an article from TASS, the I think it's the largest or second largest Russian state news agency, about this. It's titled "U.S. Seeking to Develop Bioagents Targeting Certain Ethnic Groups," and then this is another article from InfoWars, Russian Ministry of Defense on U.S. biolabs. One goal was to create bioagents that can target certain ethnic groups. And if you actually look at the text of these two articles, what you will see is that they're very similar. They're making similar arguments, but they are not using the same text. And this creates a lot of challenge that, if we want to, outside of cases like China, where we have this top-down coordination, if we kind of want to measure these flows of information where it's not coordinated, how do we do that? And so what we call this phenomenon of when newspapers and other entities are kind of sharing similar information, narrative similarity. And so what do we mean by that? Because we have a particular meaning. So stories spread very quickly in contemporary journalism. And again, as I mentioned a minute ago, journalists may pick up others' coverage, reusing their information and claims. And in addition to being hard to measure, because they're not using the exact same words, as I just mentioned, there's a lot of concern about this phenomenon. So there's a broad concern that, especially in the United States, that with the creation of a lot, the defunding, but really all across the world, the defunding of news means that people are kind of picking up stories quickly. And there's a special concern about kind of how in the United States, US digital news outlets, especially low quality outlets, might launder information and arguments from actors looking to influence the US information environment. So it's both really hard to measure, and there's this concern that this sort of information that maybe US consumers don't want to be consuming from TASS or Russian state media might be kind of laundered into the US information environment through this kind of process of narrative similarity. Uh, and again, the real challenge here is how do we identify these cases? If you want to tell consumers of news outlets, hey, a lot of this stuff is actually coming from foreign influence operations. If you want to kind of build digital literacy, you want to be able to identify these instances. But again, they're really hard to identify because generally speaking, they're not kind of using the exact same text, and there's good reason for that. That in that due to journalistic norms and copyright, outside of syndication agreements, this laundering is really unlikely to involve exact text reuse. Okay, so what we do is, and I should say, one other motivation for this paper is that despite the fact that uh, uh, news outlets commonly uh, do not use exact text. Historically, that was often a common way that communication researchers, sociologists would measure this type of kind of information diffusion. So it's a commonly used approach, but it's we can say like from the get-go, it's going to be likely to miss a lot of cases because these type of information flows are actually unlikely to involve exact text reuse. And furthermore, we're going to show that in this paper, that if you kind of just look for kind of the exact copying of stories in places like the US information environment, you're going to miss a lot of these cases. So what we do in this paper is we leverage tools from semantic similarity in large language model annotation to measure whether pairs of articles are engaging in this phenomenon called narrative similarity. And we define it a little bit more precisely here, that whether they are really telling the same story, i.e. they're making the same claims about the same underlying events or subjects. Some benefits of our approach is that it works across languages and it allows for discovery. In this paper, we also, in order to kind of show that this approach works and it works better than some existing options on the table, we develop an approach to measuring out-of-sample performance in this pretty rare event setting based on human-in-the-loop coding. And I'm going to show you that our approach outperforms related estimators by quite a bit. In this paper, we focused on one empirical application, which was news coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So in the spring of 2022, we collected news articles from 45 news websites from the US, Russia, and Ukraine. This included 4 Russian state media websites, 18 popular US news websites, 11 low quality US news websites. These are the websites that people were quite concerned about that might have been spreading this type of information, especially during this sort of crisis event of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And one thing to note is that these low quality sites were largely right-wing sites, as well as 12 Ukrainian news websites. And for the Russian Ukrainian sites, when available, we collected English, Russian, and Ukrainian versions. For tractability of this exercise, which I'll get back to this at the end, why and throughout why we had to do this, we restricted our corpus to a case study within this kind of broader landscape of coverage of Ukraine. And that was in particular coverage of rumors that the US was running biological laboratories in Ukraine. So this was a kind of story that was run at the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and it was being used by Russian state media to justify its invasion of Ukraine. We collected, to collect this data set, we collected through web scraping about 700,000 articles in the spring of 2022. And then we, from those sources I mentioned, and then we restricted them to about 3,500, which included keywords that we argue will pick up this kind of bioweapons case. So they had to include the keyword Ukraine and then one of these following keywords: biological or biolab, bioweapon, or pathogen. And then the research question we're going to answer with this new approach that we developed was the following: were low quality US news websites more likely to publish stories with similar narratives to Russian state media than mainstream US news websites? So we wanted to kind of address this kind of concern that was out there popularly was, did we see this phenomenon of narrative similarity kind of in the laundering of kind of stories from Russian state media into the US media ecosystem, and was this really happening a lot more at low quality sites than mainstream US sites? Just to give you a sense of the data, so this is the number of articles that are in our bioweapons case study. So this is from the start of the data collection in January 2022 to the end in May. And this is by the publication date, and then just shows a kind of running count. For there's a couple key events that happened during this data collection time period. Right here, this spike was when Russia called the UN Security Council for a meeting to address the bioweapons. And then a second event was that Russia accused Hunter Biden of funding this bioweapons program. Okay, so that's sort of our goal, is what we want to do is we want to figure out a way to identify stories in this U.S. media ecosystem that shared information, had narrative similarity, had the same, talking about really having the same story is another way to think about it. So making the same claims about the same subjects. That was our goal always, and we quickly realized about 6 months into starting this project that there was some huge challenges in our way. So our quantity of interest, this narrative similarity, you can also think of it as like story reuse, is a document level pairwise estimand. Do two documents make the same claim about the same underlying events or subjects? The problem is that this is a pairwise thing. And even with only 3,500 documents in our data set, the number of pairs very quickly grows. So if you think of 3,500 documents, that's 6 million pairs that we would need to see, okay, are they containing the same story or not? And there's three challenges with this. Oh, and then the other thing I should say that comes from this is that there's 6 million pairs, but you would expect on the face of it, there'd only be a small fraction of them that would be actually having the same stories about the same event. So it's a rare event within this sort of pairwise space. So it's sort of like looking for a needle in the haystack. And that creates three challenges for us. One is cost. If we, just did a blunt annotating all 6 million pairs via API, it would have cost at time of publication $23,000, way beyond this. And this is just for a small case study. So if we're thinking about this as a method that could be used in other places, that's not going to work. The other issue is creating balanced training data. And this creates a problem both for validation and doing any sort of fine tuning. So we did some estimation, and if within these 6 million pairs, we'd wanted to create a data set of find true positive cases of this, we estimate that we would have needed to randomly sample approximately 1,500 pairs to find one true positive case. And so it's a really rare event. And if we want to create training data, if we want to create validation data, we can't just randomly sample. We'd have to spend an unbelievable amount of time to find these cases. A third challenge is that, and this is a challenge for both the RAs for doing any sort of hand labeling, as well as for this overall building an estimator, is that the documents are different lengths, and not all parts of the documents are relevant or important. So to address these three challenges, we developed this narrative similarity approach using LLM annotation. It has 3 steps. The first step in the process is to address that third challenge. We distill these documents down. We first use an LLM to summarize the documents into 7 or 10 sentences. That also ensures, we say 7 to 10 sentences in English. So it kind of makes everything within the same language. And then the second thing that we do to further distill things down is we extract from these summaries the key claims that are being made. So what, claims can be things like what caused what things can be arguments being made in the text. And so we extract all those claims, and we also extract all key subjects and events within those summaries. After we do this distilling, we have a second step, which is called candidate pair identification. And this step is to restrict the comparison space down from 6,000 to something much more manageable, close to 40,000. And we do this through using off-the-shelf embeddings. So this is a very cheap and inexpensive approach to kind of reducing the number of pairs that we need to look at way down from 6 million to something much more tractable. And then in the third step, LLM annotation, is we take those pairs, that much smaller set of pairs that pass the candidate pair step, and we can then we can annotate those pairs with an LLM. Do they actually have overlapping claims and subjects? So I'm going to talk about each step in detail. And then what I'm going to do is talk about, and after I kind of introduce the method, I'm going to talk about the other kind of approaches we compared it to, and then how we also kind of did that comparison with validation. And then finally, I'll get to the results. So this first step is this distillation and summarization step. So we take inspiration from the chain of thought literature. The idea that you should break complex down into intermediary steps that can improve performance. So we first use GPT-4o to summarize each article into 7 to 10 English sentences. And then in two separate prompts, we use, again, GPT-4o, which at the time when we were working on this was one of the frontier models, to extract the subjects and claims of each article summary in enumerated lists. So here's the prompts we use. So the summary just said, please summarize this news article into 7 to 10 English sentences. We would give the article, subject and events. We would pass the summary text and say, enumerate the people, place, objects, and events detailed in the following paragraph. Claims, enumerate the causal, normative, descriptive, and conceptual claims detailed in the following paragraph. So that kind of distills things down. So we have this for each article of our 3,500 articles, we have a summary, and then we have a list of subjects and events in the article, and then we have a list of claims. And, as a reminder, our goal here is to find pairs of articles that have both overlapping subjects and events to a significant degree and overlapping claims. The second step is the candidate pair identification. And as a reminder, even with just 3,500 articles, that blows up to 6 million pairs. So this step is about kind of reducing the number of pairs we needed to look at to figure out which ones with an LLM are actually engaging in this pattern of story reuse or narrative similarity. So we use a computationally inexpensive method to generate these candidate pairs. And our goal was really to substantially reduce the number of pairs that we needed to annotate with an LLM while still preserving as many true positives as possible. So what we did was we embedded the summarized paragraphs with an off-the-shelf embedding model, a sentence or paragraph embedding model, MPNet. This process, by doing this embedding and then setting a cutoff for the embedding, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second, this process reduced the number of pairs that we needed to annotate with an LLM in this third step from over 6 million to, to 64,000. And it minimally discarded true positives that we didn't want to lose in this sort of candidate generation step. Just to give you a little bit more details on this, there's two steps in the candidate generation. So first is the by encoder. So basically we embedded each summarized article with the MPNet sentence embeddings, and then we calculated the cosine similarity between each pair of embeddings. We then tune this threshold with a set of known true positive articles that I will introduce a little bit later in the talk. And so we made sure we weren't discarding basically anything that shouldn't have been discarded. And then we do a second step in the candidate generation that we pass pairs that were kind of met the threshold so it didn't discard anything through a cross encoder. And so cross encoders are more computationally expensive, but they basically have more precision because they jointly encode pairs of input texts and produce a single similarity score for each pair. So to give you a little sense of this candidate selection process, so we had 121 true positives. So we created, I will introduce the details of which, we created this recall set of like known cases of story reuse or narrative similarity. And so we use this to make sure, like, as we set these thresholds in this candidate generation process, we weren't losing any cases that we shouldn't have been discarding. So this is showing two distributions on the right in blue. This is showing the kind of recall set. So these are pairs of known that were actually engaging in narrative similarity. And in red here at left, these were the kind of the rest of the 6 million pairs. And in this first bioencoder step, we set a cutoff at 0.7, and you can see there's a small number of the recall set that's discarded, but the vast majority, 97.5%, are kept with this cutoff, and we're getting rid of a lot of these, or 5.6 million of these pairs, which is 93.6% of these pairs. So we basically set this cutoff here, and we're only gonna, with an LLM, annotate these articles. We'll actually have to go to the second step. We're only going to look further at these articles here to the right of the cutoff, and then these pairs of articles here. In the second step, the cross encoder, we do the same process. We use the same same kind of set of 121 articles in these known true positive cases. We set this cutoff of 0.5. You can see again, it's still retaining, again, 95.8% of these true positive cases, but we're discarding, again, another good chunk of the rest of the pairs. This is what allows us to reduce the comparison space from over 6 million to 64,000. But we are, still keeping 95.8% of the known true positive cases. Okay, so that's the second step of candidate pair identification. The last step is LLM annotations. This is the really computationally expensive step where we're going to pass pairs of articles through our LLM annotator. And this is the thing, we wanted to really reduce the number of pairs we did this to. So at this point, we only have those 64,000 pairs instead of 6 million. So what we do in this step is that we developed prompts to mimic human labeling. So, as a little bit of a backstory, when we started this project, I think in some ways we felt like we bit off more than we could chew because it's such a hard task. And so what we did to kind of get us to start to build some intuition of like, how could you do this with a computer, is we started actually with our RAs. And we had human research assistants label these pairs of articles. And we asked them, we did through many rounds trying to figure out, what's the right instructions we can give to these RAs that will kind of capture this range of cases when stories are really copying from each other. And so we developed these prompts based on what the kind of rules and ideas that we came to through working with our really amazing research assistants. And one thing I want to note is that this is such a hard task for research assistants to compare pairs of articles. It has a very heavy cognitive load, and so they did a really wonderful job working with us for about a year on how to create our validation sets and also how to figure out these rules. So again, we developed these prompts to mimic human labeling. And for each candidate pair, we sequentially prompt them via the GPT-4o API. First, we kind of gave a pair, and we didn't provide it the summary. At this step, we just provided it the kind of annotated lists, the lists of subjects in the two separate articles. So we said you will provide it with the lists of people, places, objects, and events discussed in two paragraphs. based on these lists of subjects, do the 2 paragraphs discuss the vast majority of the same people, places, objects, and events? And then in a separate call, we asked about claims. We said you will be provided with the lists of descriptive, normative, conceptual, and causal claims discussed in 2 paragraphs. Based on these lists, do the 2 paragraphs discuss the vast majority of the same claims? And so for a pair of articles to be judged as engaging in narrative similarity by our approach, they had to have a value of yes, as labeled by the LLM to both of these prompts. What we found through doing this was that off the shelf, just labeling with an LLM worked pretty well, but we saw substantial performance gains with fine tuning. Now, a key challenge with fine tuning, which I already talked about with just, if we wanted to, just create a random sample is that was generating training data. It wouldn't have been feasible for us to just take random samples of articles from that 6 million because so many, there's so few cases. Again, we would have needed to, read 1,500 pairs of articles just to find one. So instead of doing random sampling, we use purposive sampling to generate these cases. We basically randomly sample pairs of articles predicted to be positive cases by our alternative estimators and LLM annotation without fine tuning. And then we hand labeled these. And we use these for both our estimate of precision of the different estimators and for fine tuning of this of the LLM annotator. And so we had a sample, we ended up with a sample of 622 pairs, 161 true positive cases, and 451 true negative cases. So that's our basic approach that we used in what we developed, the steps of kind of distillation, summarization, candidate pair, and then LLM annotation. But we wanted to benchmark how well our approach did against different approaches. So we compared our approach to exact text reuse. And this would be kind of the standard in the literature for a lot of people who've studied information reuse. They often will use an exact text approach. And in particular, we used 5-word gram cosine similarity. And to do this, for non-English text, we just translated them to English. We also tried a topic modeling approach where we kind of grouped articles together by their course and topic prevalence. We also wanted to see, if semantic similarity worked well. And this particular estimator is basically the first part of our pipeline without the additional LLM annotation. And then finally, we used a recent approach developed by Ash et al. Called Relatio. And they combine named entity extraction with semantic role label. And so you can use this approach to identify common statements of who does what to who. One thing I want to be really clear on is that we're not saying that the Relatio paper is an amazing paper, and they are really using this method they developed for a different underlying estimand than we are interested in here. So we were just trying to see if this approach could work for what we were trying to study. And just to give a little bit more details on this Relatio approach, so again, they combine named entity extraction with semantic role labeling, and we basically use their method for document representation, and then calculate the between article cosine similarity for each document pair using their method for document representation. For all of these approaches, we tuned the cutoffs using hand-labeled data. And in the results for each estimator, we report the best performing cutoff. Okay, so I've been sort of talking about the data we used for training, data we used for validation, and I needed to introduce this other stuff before I could tell you how we created this data, but I'm going to get to that now. So for how did we actually validate our approaches, both our approach and these other approaches? We really wanted to have an out of sample measure of performance, even though you can think of these really as unsupervised approaches. So we wanted to get a measure of precision and recall. To estimate precision, that was actually pretty easy. To do this, we randomly sampled pairs of articles predicted to be positive by our different estimators at different cutoffs. So for text reuse, relatio, semantic similarity. And then we had these pairs of articles hand labeled by human labelers. Recall was a lot more challenging because narrative similarity is a rare event. And we didn't, we wanted to get a measure of recall that is kind of separate from our overall approach. So we couldn't just like look for recall within the 64,000, for example. So we use a human in the loop approach for recall. And basically, we instead of just kind of coding a random sample, we sample cases near what we think would be near the decision boundary using an entirely different estimator from the ones we've tested here, in order to, or actually not entirely different, distinct, but in some ways related, to increase the probability of sampling true positive cases. So the way we do this is we start with a seed set of 250 Russian state media articles, and then we create ranked lists of articles from other sources, the other US sources, by their similarity with the seed set. And we use a measure of similarity distinct from all tested estimators. We actually randomized, we used two different approaches. One was a bag of words estimator with a TF-IDF. That is actually probably the most similar to the n-grams representation. And we also tried an approach using universal sentence encoder embeddings based on the summary. So that one did have some overlap with our approaches, but again, using distinct embeddings. We had a human annotators label these articles. In particular, we had, I can talk about this in the Q&A, we had them label the summaries of these articles because of challenges in reading in rank order until they had a run of 5 kind of cases that they didn't see as engaging in narrative similarity. And in doing this, our amazing research assistants coded about 1,600 unique pairs and identified 121 true positive cases. So we tuned cutoffs for candidate selection, alternative estimators with this training data set. And then we, after we'd already tuned all the cutoffs, and also we additionally collected a holdout set of 47 true positive cases from a separate set of 92 focal articles. Okay, so here are our results. At the top here these are the results for exact text reuse. This is relatio, the STM approach, and then these bottom 3 are kind of different versions of our approach. This expert only is basically just using steps 1 and 2 of our approach. Expert LLM is the full thing. Actually, I should go next to Expert LLM zero shot. This is the candidate selection and LLM annotation, but it's just zero shot. We don't give any additional fine tuning. And then this is with the additional fine tuning. And what we have here on the columns, here is, I'll first say precision. Here's the precision column. So, for each of these different approaches, we sampled articles that were predicted to be positive by each of the estimators. Then we had a human label it. This column is recall. This is only presenting recall results on the holdout sets. This is the kind of set of articles that we know were true positive. So of these, how many did each of the different approaches predict to be positive? This is just a total number that each approach predicted to be positive. And then F1 is the harmonic mean between precision and recall. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is this 5-word gram exact text reuse approach. This approach, again, I think this would probably be the most common way that researchers have tried in the past to measure information reuse and similarity. And what you'll notice about this is that it actually does pretty well on precision for such a challenging task, but it only has 6% recall. And that is an extremely low number. So, when we got these results, it really gave me pause that, if you see a paper in an information environment where there isn't this kind of top-down coordination, like what we studied in my other article on Chinese state media coordination. If you see a journal article that is using an exact text measure to capture information reuse, it's going to miss a lot of cases. Because again, as I started this talk noting, journalists do reuse each other's copy, but they pretty rarely use exact text. The second thing I want to show here is the relatio results. Relatio does much better on recall, but its precision is quite low. This makes sense because again, relatio was developed for a different task in mind. But if we kind of think about this task, what it suggests is that we can't solve the problem of exact text reuse from named entity recognition and semantic role labeling alone. The STM results look pretty similar. So again, something that's similar to relatio and STM is they have fairly low precision, which means that they're going to have a lot of cases that they predict to be positive but are not. Yes, I see a hand.
We can continue, and when the talk finishes, we can have a Q&A time, and you can receive the questions all together. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. But if we look at our approaches, this is the SBIRT only. This is the whole pipeline with just one and two, the distillation and the candidate generation, no LLM annotation. Does better on recall and does better on precision, but not that much better. Not what you want. You don't want a method that only 30% of the cases it predicts to be positive are actually true positives. If we look furthermore at the kind of, I don't know, when we add an annotation, it gets really interesting. So if we look at the zero shot, this is actually how we did the best on recall, but it's still not great on precision. So when we add the fine tuning step, we get a little bit worse on recall, but we're doing much better on precision. And so when we got these results, this is what made me happy about the paper. It's like, okay, so if we can fine tune this case, this estimator, we can do a lot better in precision. And so it gives us our best performing F1 score of 60%. Okay, so now that, I've spent thank you for sticking with me while we went through the details of this kind of multi-staged approach. And I want to kind of get to the kind of exciting results. So the first thing I want to show you is that indeed we found that low quality media in the United States were more likely to kind of engage in this story reuse, narrative similarity with Russian state media. So what this plot is showing you is the distribution over publications for the percent of news articles that were matched to different types of sources. So this here is showing the distribution over publications for the percent matched to Russian state media, percent matched to Ukrainian media, and percent matched to another US source. And then we're breaking this out by whether the publication was a low quality source, like Zero Hedge, InfoWars, versus a kind of more mainstream US news source. Okay. And so what we find, if we just focus on the left here, it looks like on average, low quality news sources, when they were covering the bioweapon story, were more likely to draw on to have kind of narrative overlap with Russian state media than the popular US news sources. So these are box plots. So here, the dark line is the median, the 25th and 75th percentile across the publications, and you can just see just by eyeballing it, it's this line is higher on the kind of median line is higher here than here. In terms of what percent of the articles had narrative overlap with other US sources, it actually looks a little bit more similar. I think where you see a bigger gap again is Ukrainian sources, that mainstream US news sources were more likely to draw on Ukrainian sources than low quality sources. One thing I want to emphasize is that we can't establish directionality here. It's possible that like the Russian sources were copying from these news sources. So we're not making a statement about directionality. We're really making a statement of overlap. The second thing that I found that I think that is interesting about this paper is that what it shows is that we have to think really carefully about what estimators we're using, because it might be the case that not only do we get a biased estimate with different estimators, we also might miss whole classes of cases. And so this plot is showing, it's very similar to the previous plot. But what I'm going to show you is how do the results look different by two different approaches. So by using our best performing fine-tuned estimator versus comparing it with our best performing n-gram estimator. And then again, this is low quality versus popular. And then here on the horizontals, I just have the different sources. So for example, this first is the exact same thing, distribution over publications for percent of articles that have overlapping stories. And you can see here's our estimate for low quality sources for the percent of articles matched or having narrative similarity with Russian state media. And this is what we get when we use our approach, and this is what we get with an n-gram approach. But the most important thing is over here. So here is our estimate for popular US news sources. Here's our approach. If we use an n-gram estimator, we found no cases of narrative similarity with Russian state media. And this is really important because we're missing a whole class of cases. If we had used this approach, it might look like US news sources never had any overlap with Russian state media, but we're really missing a lot with this sort of exact text for use approach, which again makes sense if we think about the kind of structure of journalism and news production. I'm not going to go into these details because I know I'm running out of time, but here are the results for the other different sources. Again, we're kind of missing, we're not entirely missing whole cases, but we're missing a lot of cases of the Ukrainian media as well. Okay, so some limitations. So we use the word narrative similarity. I think another word we could use is story similarity, story reuse. What we need to be really clear about what we're capturing. It really might be capturing objective, fact-based news reporting on the same event. And so it's not necessarily that they're making the same arguments. They might be really just focused on the same exact story. So it's not necessarily that low quality news are making more pro-Russia arguments. They might just be focused on the same sets of information. And that can also be a vector of influence, is that that the U.S. Or not influence of kind of similarity, that the low quality sites are covering the exact same information, the exact same stories and events as the Russian state media stories. As I mentioned a minute ago, similarity doesn't indicate influence, but potentially we could use temporal patterns to establish directionality. The solution we came to with fine tuning is very bespoke, and it would require new training data with each application. So it's going to be hard to scale. I think something we need more information on is this summarization process and what LLMs are attending to. I think the biggest issue with our approach is that there may be scaling issues, especially with our purposive sampling approach. And we really need more work on how to scale LLM annotations if this result holds in other contexts, beyond news media even. And more work is really needed to scale this to work with larger corpora. And I'll get to some potential solutions in a minute. And I am not convinced this approach would work for social media posts or other short texts, because what we found actually with the human annotations is that context is super important. One thing we realized very quickly was that we couldn't have RAs be comparing sentences. They really needed the context of the article, and that's likely true for the LLMs as well. So that's why I'm a little bit negative on how this could be used for social media. So in terms of things that we're thinking about working on in the future, so we want to apply this to our full corpus in other areas where we want to observe flows of information and narratives. But this is a much bigger corpus. This is close to 700,000 articles. So if we naively applied our approach, it would cost $12,000 just for summarization. And for LLM annotation, we estimated it would cost $9 million. So this is a solution that's very difficult to scale. So some scaling ideas we've been thinking about is, only comparing within the same day or within a short time window. Potentially limit articles down to being in the same topical space first, but there's some issues with that. We might be kind of missing cases if we do that using an STM or topic modeling. Some ideas are using open weight models, but of course that just creates a separate type of cost. And then some of the things we've been thinking about is leveraging network information to identify overlapping pairs without comparing all pairs. And if you have ideas about scaling this, we'd be really interested in collaborating with you and talking with you about this further. Okay. So just a conclusion. So thanks for bearing with me as I know I'm 3 minutes over time. Researchers, something to take from this paper, I think, is that researchers seeking to measure information and narrative reuse need to carefully consider and validating the match between their approach and the underlying target. And so, we develop, and so that's what we tried. That's why actually we started with the human annotators and trying to see, what do humans pay attention to when they try to figure out what is overlapping. And in doing so, we were able to develop an approach that outperforms alternative approaches. And we identify patterns that would be missed by these alternative approaches in US news websites, narrative overlap with Russian state media. So that's all I have, and I'm looking forward to everyone's questions. And again, thank you so much for having me this evening or this morning.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Hannah, for this great talk. I really enjoy it, and I learned a lot, not only about the content of this research, but also about how to frame a methodological paper. So I learned a lot. I hope that our audience, I'm sure that our audience, our students, and our faculty members here also enjoy the talk a lot. Now the floor is open to accept questions. Please line up in the chat box to ask questions. There are two ways you can indicate that you will have questions to ask. One is to directly input the questions, and if you are not that convenient, I can read the question for you, or I can direct you to read your question by yourself. Otherwise, you can also input a brief message to indicate that you have a question, and I will direct to you by taking the temps. So now I see two questions in the chat box. One is from Shenlong and the other is from Jaemin. So Shenlong, do you want to raise your questions by
Yeah.
yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Wai, for this great presentation. I'm a PhD student from CSL at CHK. So I've read this paper a long time ago because that SFMR issue is quite impressive and famous here. So it is unexpected to meet you in your presentation. Basically, I have two questions. The first one is about because you narrative breaking the narrative down into a simple list of entities and claims. So do we risk losing the core framing and emotional tone? So for example, two articles may share same facts, but they have different stories. So how does this extraction method capture the deeper meaning of a narrative rather than its basic surface level pattern? So this is my first question. And my second question is about the performance. In your presentation, you said there is a huge gap between the zero shotting prompting and the fine tuning model. Basically from the 37% to almost 80%. Oh, 80%. Yeah. I just wondering, do you mean the standard language models cannot measure complex science concepts? Because no matter how good the prompts are, it looks the performance is quite limited. So that's my question. And the following up question is, if fine tuning is always required, so what should we do if we do not have the resources to annotate data or training a model? And another question is, prompts is, I think, is always weak because even a small variation of a prompt will generate a different answer here. So how could we ensure the validity of the outputs? Yeah, that's all my questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon. These are awesome questions. So, first of all, for your question about this deeper meaning of narratives, I think in this we have a particular definition of narratives, and I think this came out of just basically for this paper, and I think again it came out of what we were interested in, which was we were interested in journalists' coverage of different stories. So not necessarily. Sort of like framing is really important, but we were really interested in just a much more basic thing. Are they covering what sorts of information are they covering? And so that is just the thing that we were interested in here. And I think that, if you wanted to get at these kind of deeper meanings of framing, you could try to do this with a similar approach, but that is just not the aspect of narratives that we were studying. And the reason for that is basically just tying it into journalistic production, that this is like a common thing of picking up each other's coverage. And the second is just because of our personal interest in it. For this question about why was the zero, as I understand it, your second question, which is also a great question, is about, why did the fine tuning precision results do much better than the fine tuned precision results do much better than the zero shot. And I'm not sure, but I suspect what it is it's giving some sort of meaning to these prompts in this specific context of what these kind of overlaps look like. But I'm not, I haven't done systematic research into exactly when this a fine-tuned approach would work or not. That's sort of beyond the scope, but it's a really interesting question. There is some research that, and I think we certainly found that we did worse when we included just a couple examples that, as you suggested by your question, including just a couple examples can kind of pull things in different directions. And so, with the purpose of sampling approach, we tried to get to a more, not random, but a more representative sample of the different ways that journalists engage in information reuse in this sample. And so that is what, I think allowed to give the annotator a little bit more context to making these decisions. The third question is about, I interpret this as about scale. If fine tuning is always required, what do you do when you don't have the resources? I think the thing I think that is exciting about fine tuning is it seems like you don't, we had, I think, 650 cases, which for this type of task was a lot. Because it was really time intensive for the RAs to code these pairs. But for other types of tasks, um, coding 200, 300, 400 labels is something that you as a researcher can do. So, it used to be to do machine learning, you needed like an army of research assistants to code 2,000, 5,000 items. If you were trying to train a machine learning model from scratch, using like it's not using one of these language models. And there is some work by, a lot of, I think an important finding, and this is another article by one of the editors of the special issue, Tom Davidson's. If you haven't read this article, I think it's also an SMR by Tom Davidson. I forget the name of the article, but he's at Rutgers, and he shows that it does seem to be a consistent finding that fine tuning is really helpful, but you don't need huge numbers like you did previously when you had to train things from scratch. And so you're moving into a world where you as the researcher can do this. And so I think that I have a lot of issues with, there's a lot of ethical issues with AI, generative AI, but I think one positive of it is that it does make machine learning and this sort of stuff a little bit more, and this does democratize things a little bit in this direction. And then I think the last question is also a great question. 100%, there's a small variation. I've actually started to get interested in this actually just from a sociological perspective of like how tiny changes and how people are using these models gives you very different results. The way we thought about this for this paper was that we had a training set and a holdout set. So we didn't touch the holdout set that we showed for the recall until we'd made all the decisions, basically. And so we figured everything out, and then we say, okay, how well does it do on this holdout set? And luckily, the results were very similar. So I think that becomes really important when you're working with these types of papers, where you have like an avalanche of small decisions.
Oh, thank you so much. I actually got a lot.
Thank you both for the questions and for the answer. I have seen tons of questions in line already. Very good, Sun. So the next question opportunity goes to Jamie, my colleague here at CUHK, Assistant Professor of Sociology as well. So Jamie, please.
Hello, Anna. This is excellent presentation. I'm also working on CSS and primarily on social networks. And when one strand of my research is about Korean nationalism and its role in polarization, which use a lot of methods that you mentioned in the presentation. So I learned a lot, and hopefully we can beat ASA or something like that. So I'm scheduled to present in Elena's mass sociology session this year. But anyway, so I have probably it's a trivial question. So I think the role of LLM annotation at step 3 is quite crucial. So in which you sequentially prompt by two things, right? Same subject and same claim. And what really stands out to my mind was the expression of the vast majority, right? The vast majority of the same people and the vast majority of the same claim. So I'm just wondering, like, given the two prompts, what does LLM produce on output? So both yes, then it would quote like, the same pair. But also, I want to hear about your thought about the choice of the word, like the vast majority. Was that really deliberate,
Yeah.
or because sometimes
Yes.
your prompts are really like sensitive in terms of things. So sometimes what I do is that kind of sanity check, for example, create another column that so this is kind of borderline case and things like that. So just I want to hear about that.
Yes, this is a great question. And yes, I would love to meet up at ASA. I'm planning on going this year too. So that would be great to meet up in New York. So yes, actually this word was very intentional. And so the precision results we presented, we actually ran a whole other round of precision before that. And like, we also did a lot of like prompt development. And it turned out this was actually kind of important, this word, like other things. And it actually wasn't just important for the LLM, it was important for our RAs. So like when we worked with the RAs, we needed to tell them like that the RA's prompt was like they have more than the majority. Because for the RAs, otherwise it was hard for them to know like, okay, what counts as overlap or not? Like, what is substantial overlap? So we told the RAs to really think about it in terms of like more than 50% overlap. And vast majority was the word that it seemed to grab onto, like when we gave it to the LM, it grabbed onto the RA's coding. So yeah, and that's also why it was really important that we had this holdout set too, because we did all this like tinkering with these prompts. And again, if you're working in this world with this avalanche of tiny decisions, you need to set things up such that you don't kind of overfit to things. And so that's again another reason why we had this reserve.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question would be from Professor Eric Hekela, Emeritus Professor from USC.
Thank you for the presentation, which I found fascinating. Just very quickly, as you were talking, I was wondering about whether you find or might be concerned about what I might call narrative drift, so that there's something from TOS that comes in, and then you pick up something sort of in the US that you find a similarity, and then so A is similar to B, and then B may be similar to C, but by the time you get to G or to M or to Z, it's gone off someplace else entirely. And if that's something that you're concerned about or control for. The other little question may be quite irrelevant, so please feel more than free to just pass it by for some other time. But I'm very sort of interested in Roland Barthes. This is a little bit of an obscure question, but Roland Barthes was a semiologist, very active in the 50s, 60s, very influential among certain circles. So kind of famous in obscure circles. And he had a piece that he wrote in the mid-60s called Introduction to the Structural Analysis of Narratives. And I first became interested in this about 20 years ago, and it's an extremely dense piece, but it just seemed that he was, this was before the age of all of these tools, and he's trying to think in terms of what are the basic structural elements of a narrative, the way we used to diagram sentences, at least in my day, in grammar school. And I'm wondering if you've encountered that. I mean, is that influential in the kind of work that you're doing? Because I would love to see whether there's a way of taking the kind of understanding of the structural analysis of narratives now and seeing whether they're comparable to what he had, or whether there might be some insights that he had that could be relevant here. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Again, these are all just such amazing questions. So the narrative drift question, yes, we're really worried about it. And that's why it's pairwise. And that's also why I think that the network solution that I proposed at the end, this potential way to scale this, probably won't work. It's this exact problem. So the estimate that we end up with is for each article, we have an estimate. We can, with our approach, we estimate for each article whether it has an overlap with any Russian state media articles, any Ukraine articles, any other things. So we basically, if you think about it as a data frame, what we have is like for all 3,500 articles, we just have like an indicator. Did it match by our estimator, did it match any Russian state media, any Ukraine, any US? And then with the charts I showed you is just saying, over that publication, what percent of articles had these matches. So it's totally pairwise. So we for what we're studying here, we don't have to worry about narrative drift, basically, because we're comparing each article to each other article, basically. However, like I was saying, one solution to the problem of scale is to rely on network information. But that creates challenges because you can't rely on transitivity. Just as you were saying, that A is matched to B, B is matched to C, so C should be matched to A. Maybe as I'm talking, actually, I'm realizing maybe we can rely on transitivity to see where to look. To see, so we don't have to make all the comparisons, but we can't rely on it in itself, if that makes sense, as a measure. So for I haven't read that book, Structural Analysis of Narratives. It sounds fascinating, and and I guess where my interest, I think that my particular definition of narratives is sort of like the word propaganda. There's many different words, many different meanings of what it is. So when you write an article like this, in some ways, you just have to justify your definition within some literature. And that's what we do. We really put it within this sort of information reuse, story reuse literature. But there's a lot of other definitions of narratives that I think are really fascinating. And yeah, you could potentially use this but you'd have to adapt it to your approach. So I agree. I think the narratives are fascinating and they're incredibly hard to measure, at scale is the whole challenge here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the next question is from Muzhi. Muzhi, do you want to answer your question directly by yourself, or do you want me to help you read your question?
Yeah, probably. Thank you. I read it. Yeah, because there are many fine-tuning techniques. So I'm just wondering very quickly, like which one specifically you are using for your research. Thank you.
Yeah, we just use the off-the-shelf like fine-tuning you can do via the API, basically. So very simple, like nothing. We didn't add anything fancy.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And then the next question is from Yufan, our PhD student from the Department of the School of Communication. Yufan, do you want to ask your question directly by yourself?
Yes. First, thank you for sharing your insights. Actually, my question is more about the research motivation between this paper and also your PNAS paper, because we actually learned a lot from that paper about the scripted propaganda. And we noticed that this talk is about how to systematically match news articles via LLMs, but in that paper, you only used a text reuse approach. So I'm wondering how you decide, when it is worth developing a methodological paper when we encounter methodological constraints in our more substantive empirical studies. And could you share how you see the connection between the ideas behind these two papers?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And what I would say is this paper really did in part come out of that paper because you know, and one and so for that other paper, what we found was that for measuring this particular phenomenon in the world that we were interested in, which is scripting propaganda. So the Ministry of Publicity in mainland China, or sometimes other organizations will issue instructions to newspapers, like if you want to cover this event, you have to use this script. And what we found by doing research on that, by looking, we had a small sample of leaked propaganda instructions, leaked scripting instructions that were published on China Digital Times. And we looked at those, and then through hand coding, we identified articles that complied with those instructions. And when we did that, what we found was that when newspapers complied with those instructions, they largely just wholesale reprinted. Really high similarity in terms of exact text with the script. So for that paper, it was actually pretty simple. We didn't need to develop a new approach because we can capture this with exact text measures. And exact text measures have a lot of nice things about them. They generally, if two articles have more than 50% of their words, and especially sequences of words overlapping, you can have pretty high confidence that these were copied from each other. So it actually makes it easier to establish directionality in some cases. But then for this paper, as I mentioned at the start of the talk, that in some ways the motivation from it came out of that other paper in a separate way, which was that to respond to reviewers' comments, we had this separate set of data from U.S. sources. It's actually the same data set, but the larger one, as I use in this paper. And we wanted to show the reviewers, look, we don't think that in the PNAS paper, the China case, we're mistakenly identifying syndication with our approach. And the way we're going to make that argument is show you, let's look in a setting where we don't think this type of top-down coordination exists. There's other ways that this government in the US...
Because I've already asked my questions. So I've turned off my microphone, I've turned off my camera. So I'm just kind of listening to the rest, but it's not too much. So,
Eric, I think you're...
But all very interesting. And all this stuff is new to me.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think Hannah, you can continue. Eric just want to give some other final thoughts. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I think what I was going to say is sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so we wanted to show the reviewers, hey, we're not making a mistake with the China paper and capturing syndication. But in doing so, we realized syndication looks different than we thought it was. And then thinking about these qualitative cases that we observe, where hey, it looks like these stories are overlapping, but it's not exact text. And then thinking about how hard it is to, and so that's sort of what pushed this methodological paper forward. And so, you know, I think that methodological work is very, I find it very challenging to write a new methods paper. And so, you know, I think you should do it maybe when the need really calls for, I guess, is my approach. Unless, you know, but that's probably just like me.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. So the next question comes from Renee, who is also a PhD student here from the Department of Sociology. Renee, do you want to read your questions by yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Professor, and thank you so much for the talk. I found it not only enlightening but inspiring. And my question was related also kind of with the training part, but like when the original post, or to say, is published, then there is this time horizon when it start like losing interest or losing attention, which might imply that also the repostings would be closer to the original time publication. So does this similarity decrease over time? And if so, does that mean that maybe like working with some time weights or like time windows to do like the matching or the similarity test would also help to have like another kind of metric on the context on how this phenomena is happening?
Great. Yeah, I think that the looking within, we looked across the whole time period. I don't have any estimates for like how similarity changed over time. That's really interesting. But I think this idea of time would probably help a lot if we wanted to scale this up. Because I think that you're right, that a lot of times the news cycle is fast, right? Like, especially with these sorts of like sudden events. So I think that would definitely help to kind of reduce the number of comparisons you need to make.
Thank you.
Because I do not see any other questions in line, so possibly I can take this opportunity to ask the very last question, and because it's approaching 11 now. So Hannah, I really enjoyed the talk. And what I love a lot is about so at the beginning when you frame this methodological paper, I think you start with a need in the field. And telling the audience, look, there is such need, but we do not have very good method to really address it, right? So I approach this, I propose this new approach. And then at that time, I was thinking, then what would be the benchmark? And I was thinking that the human annotating will be the benchmark for you to do the evaluation. You do have that part, but in the end, actually, you do something even greater. That is, you compare with other approach. But here, I suddenly feel that, oh, so my question is the necessity of this step. I think it is very necessary. But if you consider your initial framework, because this is also the question that I am struggling with, we see some need, and we see that in the existing literature, there is no like existing approach directly for that need. So we want to propose a new approach, right? And then we have to validate the validity. We have to assess the validity of this approach. We need to compare it to something. The best way we can compare it is to compare it with human annotation. But human annotation can be used for training. But there may be many other alternatives. To what extent we need to do that step? This would be my question. Because those other approach are not exactly developed for that need. To some extent, we just frame it as their alternative approaches for that need, right? So in other words, there may be tons of other alternative approaches. So to what extent we can say these selected alternative approaches are not cherry pick alternative approach, but really like we need to compare with them. Or we do not quite need
Mhm.
that part. We just need to use the human annotation as the benchmark to compare the validity of our newly proposed approach. Yeah.
Angel, thank you so much. This is a great question. I think it's something I thought a lot about because there's probably an infinite number of approaches that we could do. I've compared this with, and that is not feasible for a single publication. I think that the way we thought about this is we thought about picking approaches that seemed kind of natural ways from looking at the literature that people tend to approach related questions. And you're right, they're not the exact same question. But we tried to like put ourselves in the shoes. Okay, if you wanted to do this, what would be a reasonable slate of things? Topic modeling, text reuse, named entity recognition, off-the-shelf embeddings. Like that's probably a pretty reasonable set. But there's certainly other approaches that we didn't look at, and so I think it's less. We're less claiming that, and I think this is the important thing. We're less claiming that like our approach is the best in a universe of approaches, and we're more. I think the language of benchmarks is correct. We're like benchmarking how well are we doing against these other kind of reasonable alternatives we could have taken, basically. As far as I see human annotation as more validation. I think human annotation is the gold standard, right? Like if we had infinite resources, natural language processing does not replace human annotation because there's always going to be complexity that you can get as a human reader that is challenging to get with a machine. And so I think that the really what natural language processing allows you to do is just to scale up things, basically. And so, I see it as saying, okay, against this gold standard, how well we do. But the problem, of course, with human annotation is it's very costly, time intensive, I'm so sorry. The first person who asked questions, who had so many great questions, I forgot to write down your name. As that first person, Shinlong. Yeah, Shinlong was saying, this is something out of reach for, and you do see in content analysis, sometimes these big, well-resourced teams do just label everything by hand, right? But for a single researcher or a set of researchers, that is extremely expensive. And would be impossible, I think, for this task where it's pairwise.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah, for the great talk, and thank you for all the participants here for raising the great questions. So now it's time to end this really great webinar, and we look forward for everyone's participation in our next CSS webinar. So thank you, everyone. We need to conclude the talk here today. Yeah.
And can I just, Angel, can I just say before we end up, if you have, especially PhD students, love to hear from you. So you can send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat. Let's see, hwaight at uoregon.edu. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure. We will do that. I will email you soon.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we will invite you to be Hong Kong someday in the near future on site to give us another talk.
I would love that. That would be wonderful.
Okay, yeah. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for all your participation today.